Hey, and welcome back to the Rethinking Trauma and Transition podcast. And this episode, we are talking about anxiety. Ali?
We are indeed. So anxiety is probably one of the most common experiences in everyday life for many of us. And what we wanted to do today was have a look at really what's going on when we're feeling anxious, the difference between maybe having an anxious moment within the course of the day or when you were actually living with persistent anxiety and what the impact that is on us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so would you say that's more experienced anxiety rather than suffering from it if someone is maybe going to do some typical ones like maybe public speaking, go for test exams, that kind of thing? So would you say that's more of experience than rather long-term anxiety?
Yeah. I think that's an accurate description, Rich. We can all have specific instances or experiences within our lives where we, for a short period of time, have bursts of anxiety. And actually, in that situation, to a certain extent, anxiety serves a purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's readying ourselves for an unusual experience and making sure that we are primed and we're able to respond. It's like a first stage emergency response.
Yep.
And that's very useful when, for instance, it might be in the run-up to something we don't normally engage in, where we need to be on the ball, we need to be really alert, because that's what that response is designed for.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Ali, I have heard that top athletes, when they are going to go to an event, they don't call it anxiety, they call it excitement, nervous excitement, whatever it is, to reframe that.
Well, I think this is one of the interesting elements when we look at our experiences of anxiety, because actually how we define and when we decide it as anxiety is to a certain extent quite often contextual.
Mm-hmm.
So that if it's, for instance, say for instance you love theme parks and you love roller coasters, you're more likely to experience the physiological response that your body has, actually what you're currently feeling as excitement rather than anxiety. Yet when you take a step back from that, our body's means and method of communicating an emotional state to us is actually very limited. It has to do that through physical responses.
Yep.
That means we look at the physiology of anxiety versus excitement. There's an awful lot of similarities.
Yeah, there is, absolutely. So completely, some of the symptoms you might find when, obviously this is not to diagnose anybody, we're not here as clinicians.
No, we're not.
So some of the symptoms you might find could be rapid breathing, sweating, trembling. One of them is avoiding things that may trigger you in that event. Yeah, and you can see how. Sorry, Ali. You can see how parallel some of that stuff can be with excitement or some other emotion or body function that you're experiencing at that time as well.
Well, if it goes back to that whole emergency response system that's kicking in there, then actually what you might find is you get maybe your skin becomes extra sensitive. You might find that you have hot flushes. You might find that you're maybe sweating more, your heart rate's elevated because it's pumping the blood around your system, getting you ready to respond to potentially a situation where you have to have maybe a bit more in the tank than you would normally have. But it can also be things like maybe tingling in your fingertips. It can then have longer term impacts and more serious impacts on us when that stops just being an isolated event and starts to become spread over a longer period of time.
So that'd be more of for want of a better term, more of a paralyzing kind of anxiety than a temporary solution to a short-term problem.
Yeah, and that would be when we would move into this almost the descriptor, though I hate to use it, of somebody describing them as suffering from anxiety rather than experiencing anxiety.
Yeah.
And I use the word suffering purely and simply almost to give a differentiation in time frame for that. Because that's the difference, is the duration of the experience of that emotion.
Yeah, yeah. What ways do people suffer from anxiety that you've come across?
Well, I think quite often with that experience, you will find that because your body is in that heightened emergency response system, then that means that you've got things like your adrenal system is on overdrive. You've got heightened cortisol levels within your bloodstream as well, and they're there to make you ready, but they're only designed to be there in short bursts.
Yeah.
And they're there for prolonged periods of times, and that starts to have a knock-on impact. That starts to, for instance, impact on our digestive systems. It can impact on things like muscle tension, headaches, so that it has a real negative impact on how we feel and how our bodies respond to things.
Mhm.
And those are just some of the negative impacts you can have from that.
Yeah, it's that could be considered like a continual drip of, for want of a better word again, is stress. And
Very
people
much.
become quite very stressed in those situations.
Yeah, and
Even just thinking about them, because as we discussed previously between ourselves, is, as you said, there somebody's thinking of the infinite possibilities of what's going on, and they're potentially running those scenarios round and round in their mind, ruminating over the thoughts of, say, what the boss could be saying, what a parent, teacher, whomever could be saying, and that is just ruminating around their thoughts, making scenarios up in their head.
yeah, and I think this is where kind of one of my favorite descriptions of it is it's almost like we get stuck making shit up, and then we buy into the shit that we're making up, and then we start to respond to that as if that shit's true.
Yeah.
And actually, the really important thing to keep in mind is that anxiety is fundamentally a future-paced response. It's all about something that hasn't happened yet. It might have its roots in something that's already been experienced, but it's about the outcome of that. So it's always future-paced.
And I'd like to add to that as well, it possibly won't happen either, or it probably won't happen how you're going to imagine that thing, because we can't predict the future.
Well, this is it. And I think unless we were all Time Lords, unfortunately, we can't, or ladies, we can't travel forward in time, see how that outcome's going to be, and then come back and respond accordingly. Although that thought does kind of terrify me a bit, that, I don't really want to know what my future holds. Thank you very much. But I think it's also about the duration or the length of the time that we're starting to manage out to. Because if you think about it, we only have one present, we only have one past. But the minute we start looking forward into the future, then we start to open up a range of possibilities that could happen.
Yeah.
And when we're feeling anxious about that, our natural thinking response is to try and put contingencies or decisions in place to manage that anxiety. But the more decisions or contingencies we put in place, the more options are then opened up. And it becomes like a almost self-perpetuating fan, an array of infinite choices. And if we're trying to manage all of those, then
That's
it's
an
no wonder
impossible task.
it's no wonder we end up in overwhelm, because it's just too many choices for us to make to manage those strands through.
Yeah. Have you got any top tips for people to help them manage with anxiety that we can?
Well, I think first and foremost is to ask yourself that question: am I making shit up? Because we can't time jump, we can't see forward. And it's also about almost bringing that time window and reducing it down to what we can manage in the immediate future, and recognizing that actually the rest is going to kind of have to take care of itself. And we're going to have to almost have that measure of trust that we'll be in that point to make the decisions when that becomes much more limited in its array. And that's even maybe about recognizing, what's within our immediate circle of decision making, and actually what needs to be deferred later.
Yeah. So I was thinking more practical stuff. So mindfulness, people are going on about quite a lot now. Breathing techniques, then so like the classic ones, box breathing. So the 4 breaths in, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, do that for 4 to 5 repetitions.
Yeah, I mean, I think I use box breathing a lot. I know you do as well, and it's quite often my recommendation is almost to treat it like a meditation.
Yeah.
Build it in regularly to your day, because the lovely thing about that box breathing cycle is you can do it anywhere. People don't know that you're doing that, because when you're feeling that heightened response, the last thing you sometimes want to do is draw attention to it.
Mhm.
So what you're looking for is those little tricks that help bring that stress response down and start to balance out those responses so that you're not in that high state of anxiety again.
Yeah. And with that, the John Grinder model of so breath leads to your physiology, which leads to state, which leads to performance. So if someone's breathing poorly, that leads to a poor physiology, which leads to a poor mental state, which leads to a poor performance. Then obviously the reverse of that, breathing well, leads to very, very good performance and state.
Well, I think it's also about recognizing that what happens when we practice something like box breathing, or we start to consciously pay attention to our breathing. That in itself shortens the time window because we have to be present in the here and now to do it. And the minute we shorten that time window, that pulls our thinking away from that infinite array of options, and it focuses it right now in the present. That action then acts as a distraction. It brings us back into the current moment, and it starts to calm those cycling thoughts, because sometimes when we're so far ahead in the future, it's almost like we get into the practice of tailgating our own thinking.
Yeah.
We latch onto something that we almost catastrophize it, and then it's like we can't get off the bumper of that catastrophe until we've solved the solution. Yeah.
And you had a experience with a driving instructor a little while ago. Is that correct?
Thanks for that, Rich.
That's all right. I'll throw you under the bus, Ali. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that feeling. Yes, I had to go to bad driver school quite a while ago, and and part and parcel of that was a final motorway drive, and they'd been very much focusing on stopping distances and maintaining your own space between you and the car in front. And they took me on the motorway between Glasgow and Edinburgh, because probably most people have noticed that I might have a slight Scottish accent. It's very subtle, but you know, it's there. And it was rush hour. And I remember going on to the motorway, and the focus was on maintaining your stopping distance and keeping the appropriate distance in the car in front. And about 20 odd miles down the road of driving through this rush hour traffic, we pulled over onto a flyover, and the driving instructor said to me, "Before you look down, tell me what your experience of the traffic was today." And I said, "Well, actually, I think I was being very lucky because it was quite light, and normally it's really, really heavy in the motorway at this time of day." And then they said, "Turn and look down and tell me what you see." And I looked down, it was nose to tail traffic. The difference was that I was in control of creating the space. And every time somebody had pulled in front of me or encroached on that space, I had taken the choice to then stretch that space out so that the space was owned by me, not by the other people on the road. And that was a very insightful moment, because that applies to our thinking as well. We have a choice over how close we stand to our thinking and our thoughts, and which thoughts we choose to follow.
And I think what a lot of people are not doing is staying ahead and not actually getting into the physical body. So we're not doing, as we mentioned earlier, the breath work, maybe not just going out for a simple walk, doing the exercises, doing other things to help get that person back to who and where they can be nice and grounded.
Yeah, and I think there's an element of physiology even in that, because when all our focus is up here, we literally are unbalanced.
Yeah.
We are out of balance with ourselves because their attention is here and it's away from actually our natural center of balance. And that means that there's almost like a physical instability that we can experience with that as well, because of where our attention is sitting.
Yeah.
And that act of going out in nature, as you're talking about, that brings that back down, and that helps bring that point of focus back down to our natural state of balance.
Yeah, because we are part of nature anyway, and it's good to be out if you can, get out, feet on the grass, feet on the sand, on the beach, wherever it is, and just get that contact again with nature.
that was them like recently when you were talking about fractals, Rich, and it's about where you put your attention.
Yeah. So thanks, Ali. So if people don't know what fractals are, it is so you got a whole forest, and then you just walk towards closer and closer to the forest to get to a singular tree, and just follow that tree up to the branch off to a twig, and then in twig it'll have all the little veins and all the little runoffs there as well, and then the leaf will have all the veins, big pillars going up through there. And again, as you go back out further and further and further, you'll go and see the forest. And you can't see the wood for the trees, as it were.
Yeah, so I suppose that's a bit like about my driving experience, where you're choosing where you place your focus.
Yeah.
And you can choose to look into the distance and focus on the distance, or you can choose to bring that much closer and pay attention and notice more, I suppose, the individual elements that are around you. And the minute you do that, that grounds you and brings you very much into the present.
Absolutely. And also, fractals are very good for healing as well. I can't remember the science behind it now because it's a little while since I wrote something about it. But yeah, fractals are very good for the brain chemistry as well.
Yeah.
That's it. Sorry, Ali. The brain loves patterns and pattern repetition.
Very much. If you think about it, that's quite often what our thoughts are as well, as pattern repetition as well. You know, how often are those tailgating thoughts that we follow are the repeating patterns, because there's a familiarity to it that makes us almost, it gives us a sense of comfort while it also escalates our anxiety. And that's one of those really weird kind of situations where almost there's comfort in the anxiety because we know what happens next and we can anticipate it.
Would you say comfort, or is it more something that actually used to instead?
I think used to is a good descriptor. I think it's the familiarity of it.
Yeah.
And sometimes when we are in a situation where we want to change something, actually it's the change becomes scary because we don't know what that will feel and experience as. Whereas we know what the anxiety is felt and experienced as.
And I'm guessing for some people as well, they don't know where to start with that process of change.
Yeah, especially if you've spent so much time living around your thoughts that are way far in the future, trying to draw them back in to the present, where actually you will probably find that you are just fine, you are okay in the present.
Yeah.
Then that can seem quite challenging. Yet sometimes that's as simple as realizing that actually time's happening in the present, not actually in the future.
Definitely.
And that kind of question to yourself of, okay, is this happening now or am I making shit up?
Making shit up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I suppose another quick trick that I use a lot with people is, again, a distraction technique, but it also helps ground people, and it's working with your own system to do so. And that's just a simple finger squeeze where you literally are working through finger by finger. And the goal with each finger is to hold and keep the grip until you become aware of your pulse. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's this finger here you're feeling the pulse in, or the hand that's actually holding the finger. It's just about feeling the pulse. And then you swap to the other hand and do finger by finger. Now, it works really, really well, and I have been accused of witchcraft when I've shown my clients this on numerous occasions. But the reason it works is because you can't do that unless you're in the present, unless you're actually connecting with yourself and you're paying attention. And it means that you can't be distracted and future focused, and you can't be tailgating your thoughts if you're paying attention and waiting for the sensation of your pulse. It's impossible to do both at once. So it immediately grounds and brings you back. And the minute you do that, it starts to de-escalate your breathing and starts to just settle your entire nervous system. That's
awesome. I think people really enjoy that tip.
It's it's one of those ones where, as I said, I have been accused of witchcraft on a number of occasions with that one.
Yeah. What sort of things can be described as anxiety. So there's phobias, generalized anxiety. Should we go into a few of them?
Well, I think anxiety is a component part of a lot of these experiences.
Yeah.
And in a way, anxiety is that's almost where the expression or the experience of the anxiety becomes linked to a specific set of circumstances or conditions. So if you look at things like agoraphobia or claustrophobia, you know, fear of enclosed spaces, that's where your anxiety is very much linked to a specific set of circumstances or conditions, where you know that if you're in that condition or circumstance, then that's immediately going to trigger that anxiety feeling for you.
Yeah.
Same with agoraphobia. The thought of actually having to leave that enclosed space and going out into a much more wider open space, again, a very specific set of circumstances.
Yeah, because again, people have that comfort and that familiarity within those circumstances that they are.
Yeah.
And don't expand or contract those horizons.
Very much. And that's where, for instance, you've got things like the presentation of things like OCD, where actually the OCD behavior is a coping mechanism to nullify the feelings of anxiety. So the OCD becomes the response to the initial trigger of the anxiety.
Yep. Okay. That's all I can think of.
I think that's probably a good starter for now, Rich. And I think that way, if there's anything we've said today that maybe has particularly sparked an interest or whatever, then people can maybe drop us an email or maybe a comment, and we can certainly have a look at that and come back with more information.
Absolutely. I'd like to thank Amanda, a friend of mine, Amanda Kemp, for doing the artwork in the background. And
fantastic
design,
job.
amazing.
Very much. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks for our listeners, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, and good day.